Hello, friends. As I'm sure most of you are aware of by now, yesterday Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign, and I chose to take a day before responding or commenting in order for me to have time to process this news. Because it's no secret to anyone who knows me or anyone who listens to this show that I am a huge Bernie Sanders supporter. And so yesterday, to put it mildly, I was very disappointed. But it wasn't just disappointment I felt, it was also frustration. And here's why. I assume most of us know that you can't help people or help a person who doesn't want to be helped. And this is where the old adage of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, that's where this comes from. Well, apparently that holds true for a people as well. You cannot help the people of this country if they don't want to be helped. And apparently, it's obviously painful that that's the case. They don't want to be helped. It's hard to get people to see the corruption of their own party, their own political party, when they view their party the same way they view their sports teams, which is basically they justify all the actions of their team because they see themselves in their little story that they're the heroes and the other side are the villains. And it's this kind of thinking that has gotten us into the mess that we're into today. It's why we have a Congress who is a do-nothing Congress. It's why we always get fed scraps because of how we think about our political parties and have this sort of devotion to them, again, as if they're one of our sports teams or one of our idols and that they can do no wrong in our eyes. And as long as both the Democratic and Republican Party keep pushing this narrative, getting people to give that kind of devotion, there's no chance of real change ever happening in either of these parties. So what does this mean for the progressive movement, what happened yesterday, and where do we go from here? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to accept the fact that Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee. And we don't need to worry about how it happened. We don't need to worry about the games that were played. We don't need to be concerned with the deals that were made, the things that made this happen. It doesn't matter because complaining about it, it's not going to change anything, and it's only going to cause you to feel hopeless. And we don't need or want that at this time. Or any time, actually. So if we want to find solutions, then we need to focus on solutions and not the problem. We need to learn from this particular failure. So let's start with what's not going to happen. One, Sanders supporters as a whole will not support Biden, and nor should they, for a few reasons. One, because the centrist Democrats have done nothing except malign Bernie supporters, call them names, and basically call them thugs. And now these Biden supporters think somehow that the Bernie supporters that they've been just bashing on for months on end, and even longer actually, all of a sudden we're just going to forget everything and we're just going to go, okay, sure, we'll come over and we'll support Biden now. I can tell you right now, as a whole, that's not going to happen. Another reason Sanders supporters are not going to support Biden is because there's this belief that if Biden wins, it could kill the progressive movement. And that's a legitimate concern. And that's the last thing that we want or that this country needs, whether they are smart enough to realize it or not. And then, of course, there's the fact that voting for Biden is just voting for more of the same. He's part of the corrupt establishment. He's not an answer to anything. He has no solutions, and nor does he intend on enacting any solutions. He's been caught lying time and time again, especially about things like Social Security, and saying that he never attempted to cut Social Security, and he absolutely did, of course. But he's in the same boat as Trump, is that he has no problems with telling lies and ignoring the fact that there he is on video saying those same exact things. And yet, again, the left will call out Trump for his blatant lies, but they'll completely ignore Biden and his lies. And it's just to push their own agenda, because this is all about power and money, and that's what it's always been about. And as long as we have money in politics, that's what it will always be about. So the Democratic Party has been working overtime using their propaganda machine to do their very best to demonize Trump, so that those on the left will feel like that no matter what, no matter who we have, that whole vote blue, no matter who, that was by design, because they knew they were never going to let Bernie Sanders be their Democratic nominee. And so they're doing is trying to get the Bernie supporters to go, look, if your guy doesn't win, you've got to support us no matter who, because Donald Trump is the devil incarnate, and no matter what, he's the worst thing that ever happened to us, and we've got to get him out of office no matter who we put in there. And I'm going to tell you right now, Sanders supporters are too smart for that. You might get the hacks who sit there and toe the party line to believe that nonsense, but we know better. He's part of the corrupt establishment, and that's all there is to it. And so in our eyes, there's very little that's much better than Trump as far as Biden goes. And the other thing is that they refuse, during this whole demonization, if you will, of Trump, they refuse to give him any credit for anything that he's done good. And believe it or not, he has. I think he's his own worst enemy because of the way he behaves and acts, but he has implemented some good things for this country. And on the same token, they refuse to acknowledge any of their own wrongdoings. Like I said, they'll sit there and call Trump out for his lies, his blatant lies, but they're not going to call out Biden for his lies. And this is going to be their downfall because of it. So don't expect Sanders supporters to jump on board because you think you can make them feel guilty by saying that it'll be their fault if we get 4 more years of Trump. Because the truth is that the Democrats are going to blame Bernie supporters if Biden loses, no matter what's done. They'll sit there and say, well, Bernie didn't drop out early enough. His supporters didn't support him. They voted for Trump, blah, blah, blah. They're going to always blame the Bernie supporters. So the thing is, we don't care what you have to say. Now, number 2, Biden will not beat Trump. Just because the Democratic Party is willing to turn a blind eye to the fact that Biden has cognitive decline and has sexual assault allegations levied against him, doesn't mean the voters will. And Trump is going to hammer him mercilessly with both of these. Not to even mention about his son and the nepotism. Of course, Trump does the same thing, but he can get away with it. And I think here's the reason why. Because everyone realizes Trump is a con man. And so they expect this behavior from him. But Joe Biden's trying to pass himself off as being legitimate. And the fact is he's a con man, just like Trump. And so people are going to hold Joe to a different standard because he's trying to present himself in a different light. Trump, they know he's a con man, and so they accept his behavior because they're aware of it. Now, number 3, Biden's only chance of winning is by picking Sanders as his VP, and this will never happen, and here's why. Because the corrupt Democratic establishment will never allow a progressive in a position where they are just one heartbeat away from seizing power from the centrist. They would rather see Trump have 4 more years than risk losing their power to a progressive like Sanders. And if you think about it, what is the best way for Biden to beat Trump? It's to pull the party together and bring moderates and progressives together. And the most obvious and prudent way to do that is to make Bernie Sanders his VP candidate. But like I said before, that's not going to happen because Bernie threatens their money and their power, and they're going to do whatever it takes to ensure that that doesn't happen, that they don't lose that power, that they don't lose that money, and that includes letting Trump win the next election and then blaming it on Bernie supporters. So there's a light to this all. Believe it or not, everything that happened, I believe, happens for a reason, and I also believe that there's always a positive spin. It's called attitudinal values. So we can decide, we choose what kind of attitude we're going to have when something like this happens. And I choose to look at the positives in this, and there are positives, believe it or not. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the positives, and we're going to look at what can be done. So there are a lot of progressives out there today and who are extremely upset and feeling defeated, and rightfully so. But you need to understand failure is not failure unless you give up. Failure is just a lesson that needs to be learned. And if we keep this movement going, and I should say when we keep this movement going and we don't give up, we're going to win. It may not be today, but down the road, we're going to win. Anybody who's ever experienced any kind of success understands that failures are an important part of success. You don't have success without failures. No one has ever succeeded without failing first. And this is no different. So if we look at it in a positive way, we can look at this as being actually the best thing that could have happened to the progressive movement. Because we can look at this as an opportunity. But in order to do that, we have to ask ourselves, what is the main lesson to be learned from this particular failure of not getting Bernie elected this time? And the answer is this: the Democratic Party will never allow a progressive to become the Democratic nominee. So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, if that's true, then what's the solution? And here's a couple of answers. First, we don't vote party line. We vote against the establishment. That's how we beat the establishment, by voting against them. Not by voting for Biden, not by putting another corrupt centrist in office that's going to do nothing for us. We vote against the establishment, no matter what they try to tell you to push you to vote their way, because this is all strong arming from the Democratic Party, and we can't allow it to happen. 2, we do exactly what the centrist Democrats have been telling us to do, and we start our own party. The progressive movement has gained enough momentum and enough traction that it can and could and should form its own party, and it should be called the Progressive Party, and we should push it as the party of the people, because the progressive movement is truly a movement for the people, and so it should be titled as such. This is the only way to ensure that we get the policies that are important to us to see the light of day, because it's not going to be done through the Democratic Party. Now, there's going to be one of two things that happens. Either the party will grow, which I believe it will, and it will put forth viable candidates who begin winning elections, and thereby solidifying itself as a legitimate party that can't be ignored, or the party will constantly take enough votes away from the Democrats in the elections that the Democratic Party will beg the progressives to come back into the fold, and in order to do that, they'll be willing to concede to adopting certain progressive policies. Either way, the progressives win. So if you're feeling beaten down, if you're feeling tired right now because of what happened yesterday and you feel like there's no hope, I want you to imagine just for a second what it's like to be Bernie Sanders and having fought this fight for over 40 years. And yet here's this man out there continuing to fight. Because the truth is that anyone can fight when everything's going their way and everything's going right. But it takes real courage to continue to fight when things look bleak. So I'm going to encourage you, everyone out there, to be courageous, my friends. And I promise you, eventually we will win. Because to quote the great Babe Ruth, it's hard to beat a person who never gives up. I want to thank you guys for listening to the first Powers Point. For those of you who are viewing this on our YouTube channel, thanks for watching. Until next time, be safe and take care.